All right. So today's presenter is Sarah Bronin, and I have the pleasure of introducing her, facilitating this conversation. So I'm going to share her bio. Um, Sarah Bronin is a Mexican American architect, attorney, professor, and policymaker focused on making places more equitable, sustainable, well designed, and connected. We're going to be talking about her new book, Key to the City: How Zoning Shapes Our World. Sarah also founded and directs the National Zoning Atlas, which just did an event in Atlanta, by the way, I heard was great, which aims to digitize, demystify, and democratize information about zoning in the US, as well as the National Preservation Atlas, which aims to illuminate and protect our tangible shared history. She's a foremost expert, not former, in property, land use, zoning, and historic preservation law. She's a professor at the George Washington University Law School and at Cornell University. That's my alma mater, Go Big Red. She also co-authored 4 books and 2 treatises, I think I'm saying that right, on land and ownership that will shape judicial decisions for decades, along with dozens of law review articles. Sarah holds a JD from Yale Law School, a master's from University of Oxford, bachelor's from University of Texas. She's a recipient of the Heinz Award. She has an honorary degree from Trinity College. And if all of that doesn't blow you away, she also clerked for Judge Sonia Sotomayor. It's incredible. I'm feeling like an underachiever right now. Um, and importantly, she's a native Houstonian and grew up working in her grandparents' Mexican restaurant. Okay, so before I hand the mic off to Sarah, I just want to say that this is the book. I really enjoyed reading it. I read it over about 4 days, 4 or 5 days. So it's a quick read, and what makes it really quick and interesting is that it's really a personal narrative. Autobiographies are my favorite kind of book. So this was like a great book because I'm a planning nerd. I love personal stories, and this is like a great combination of both of those things. Um, and I also just want to say that I think it's so important in this political moment for us to use the power of storytelling. So I just want to congratulate you, Sarah, on using your personal story to lift up these ideas, because I think that's how our ideas are going to become the populist ideas and how we win. So thank you for all of that. And with that, I am going to hand it over to you. So we are going to have Sarah do a presentation. I welcome you all to ask questions and put your questions in the Q&A. I'll be looking out for questions so we can pause as your questions come in so that we don't have to wait until the end. And then if there's time, we'll also have a discussion at the end, and we'll just roll like that. All right. Take it away, Sarah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ceedee and Elena behind the scenes and your tech team. It's been really great to prep for this conversation. And your prompt to me was really that your focus right now is advancing racial equity and climate resilience through land use development. And so I thought, okay, let me try to focus just for a few minutes. And sorry for the very loud heater back there.
Oh, we can't hear
Okay,
it.
great. Just for a few minutes before we get to because I really want to get to the conversation on this topic, and I want to do it through 2 lenses because, as you said, we actually have 5 National Zoning Atlas team members that live in the greater Atlanta area, and they were all at this event on Monday night presenting the Atlanta Zoning Atlas. So I do want to touch on that at the end if there's time. I know I have about 20 minutes. But you asked me primarily to focus on the book. So I'm going to talk about the book, and I'm going to talk about the National Zoning Atlas and how it works in Atlanta. So just starting with the book at first. So the image on the front of the book, so the publisher designed the image, and I looked at it and I said,
Mm,
what is that? It's actually the city of Houston, which is the
mm,
only large American city without zoning. And that is where I was born and raised. And the evidence of the lack of zoning in Houston is it's seeable on every block
Mm-hmm.
in the city. So my experience in writing about zoning and being interested in zoning really comes from, I think, my growing up in
Mm-hmm.
Houston and growing up in a neighborhood called Gulfton, which is
Mm-hmm.
today one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, very high immigrant population, and they really bear the brunt of the lack of zoning controls, because right in front of the apartment building I used to live in is a self-storage facility, a gas station, a nightclub. In those places with zoning, not things that you would put right across the street from a place
Right.
families with young kids live. So happy to talk about Houston, but I'm mostly going to focus on a different city today. And I'm going to talk through some things that we did in that city through different chapters in the book. The first chapter, which is called The Goldilocks Zone, which is really about mixing land uses. A chapter that I wrote called Making It Home, which is about really household security, your ability to have a home, what zoning can do about that, what zoning can do to increase the diversity of housing options, what zoning can do for food. I'm not going to touch on this that much, but zoning also plays a really big role on whether cities are resilient, whether they have tree canopy coverage, whether they have whether they're developing in the floodplain. And so happy to talk about that in the Q&A, but I just wanted to flag that overall. Um, so the book itself is divided into three parts. The first part is about vibrant economies, then the essentials, and then designing for delight. So I am a historic preservationist, and again, happy to talk about preservation too. The
Okay.
book starts with my conversation with Denise Best, who is here. I gave her a book, and so I said, let me take a picture of you so I could put it in my presentations. And she said, absolutely. And she is a neighborhood leader in Hartford. So Hartford's the city that I'm going to focus on. She was gracious enough when I first became chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission in the city of Hartford back in 2013, to walk with me around her neighborhood, not being a native Hartfordite, having come from Houston, but yet having the honor of being appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I
Mm-hmm.
thought I needed to understand the city. And so she was one of those
Mm-hmm.
people that walked me around. And
Okay.
it truly was an eye-opening experience, because for a professor who had never really thought about, I mean, I thought about legal cases and precedent,
Mm-hmm.
statutory references, and all of this. For the first time, I really had a chance to understand the impact of zoning on the ground. And in fact, the whole reason I wrote this book is so that people could understand that the cities that we get are the cities that we zone for. So
Mm.
the decisions we make in the zoning code are essentially what we end up seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So in Denise's neighborhood, and I talk a lot about this neighborhood in the first in the intro to the book, the Upper Albany neighborhood of Hartford, a neighborhood with a very high poverty rate, 97% Black, African American, and West Indian, and a place that had really been degraded over the years by development that had happened on the avenue, which is the commercial road with the colorful buildings that you see right behind. And right off the
Mm-hmm.
bat, you can see there's a couple of historic buildings in the background, but there's also
Mm-hmm.
low-lying development. And what you can't see is that they're parking, is parking in front. It's just asphalt. And then in front of a lot of these places, you can see the cars on the building on the right,
Mm-hmm.
then a gas station further down, fast food joints with wide curb cuts, no trees. You see a couple trees being planted recently in that photo. But when I first started on the Planning and Zoning Commission, there were no trees up and down the avenue. So
Mm.
walked and talked around the avenue, was like, why did this happen to Albany Avenue? It used to be full of beautiful buildings, three-story buildings, handsome brick buildings. And the more we dug into it, the more we realized that a really outdated zoning code was the reason why.
Mm.
This is the city at its best. So Hartford is
Mm.
historic buildings, it's the state capitol, beautiful parks. The buildings that haven't been torn down are now finally being revived and revitalized. This building,
Mm-hmm.
Capitol Lofts, was abandoned for some time. There's warehouses and industrial buildings all over the city that were just left vacant, just people left. And those have been converted to housing and other uses, and the city is slowly um, uh, re-emerging from depopulation, from the trend of white flight, very obvious here in the city where only 15% of the population is white, and it is a low income central city in the middle of
Wow.
the wealthiest suburban areas in the whole country. So
Wow.
a huge contrast between Hartford and its suburbs. And what we found was that Hartford was zoning in ways to make it easier for suburbanites to get in and out of the city, which is why you have
Oh,
those car-oriented uses on Albany Avenue, polluting the air, bringing the gas stations, bringing things that really didn't belong in a neighborhood of homes
right.
like the one that Denise lived in, multi-story
Right.
porches, families and all of that. So now the question was, what were we going to do about it? And so we actually, with our commission, adopted a whole new zoning code, did a lot of community engagement, not just having people come to us, but going to them again and again and again, showing them, asking them what their problems in their neighborhood were, figuring out which ones could be addressed by zoning, going back and saying, if we do this in the zoning code, does that work? And then adopting unanimously in one night, actually, an overhauled code with a lot of consensus. And
Wow.
just some key things that we learned from that process that relate to, I think, the prompt that I put at the beginning. We really doubled down on zoning for mixed use in a place where 25% of households don't have access to cars. They
Mm.
mostly, sometimes by choice, mostly because they can't afford it. Zoning for mixed use can actually enable people to have things that are convenient to them in their neighborhood that they can walk to or bike to or take the bus to. And a city that was 400 years old, very compact city, a walkable city already, had been zoned like a suburban area. And so we reinstituted zoning for mixed use. We really doubled down on housing anywhere there was commercial development. A couple buildings. So there's a bank building back there that was zoned for housing. It was vacant, zoned for housing.
Mm.
It came back on the rolls as a housing development with lots of affordable housing as well in the heart of downtown. Speaking of housing, we sort of held as a principle that we needed to zone for more housing and denser housing because that can create opportunity and affordability, especially
Mm-hmm.
in a depopulating city. We actually worked really hard to develop what is called a form-based code, where people debated the types of buildings, the form of the buildings, where
Mm-hmm.
the street, the number of stories, the roof type, things like that. And then what we said was, if we all agree on this, neighbors understand what's going to happen with this, with these buildings, then we can make it by right, which means no public hearings. We also expanded the areas where housing is allowed, as I mentioned, zoning in not lots of new areas for housing, and also zoning for accessory dwelling units and other types of housing. So here's just an example at Park in Maine, where these lots were just like as is in the front for decades.
Mm-hmm.
New development was permitted there. Similarly, this is just north of downtown, new development permitted there. This is right by a new stadium as well.
Mm.
It's in the background in the bottom picture. And thousands of housing units have been created since we passed the zoning ordinance in 2016. We also recognize it's not just people needing housing, but also needing transportation security. As I mentioned, lots of people didn't have cars. So why were we making it mandatory that developers build parking?
Mm-hmm.
We eliminated car parking mandates. This is my old house in the red. Think we have enough parking there, Cede?
Mm. Yeah.
Think we do. Think parking, good job on that. We've done the parking. Now it's time to redo the neighborhoods and actually,
Yeah.
instead of those cars, put development buildings. And this is in the 06106 zip code, again, one of the poorest zip codes in the country. So our bike parking requirements, we have a really strong
Mm.
biking community there, and the roads are not safe. And so building in bike
Mm.
infrastructure through zoning, as I talk about in the book, also using zoning to extend into the street and develop safe streets. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that I really push for. I didn't highlight it in the chapters, but I think it's the very last chapter in the book. It
Okay.
really goes part and parcel with what happens on the lots, what happens on the streets. Those two things
Mm-hmm.
need to be thought of together, and zoning can help with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, on the zoning side and the equity side, zoning for small scale food production. Like many cities around the country, Hartford had banned all kinds of urban agriculture. So that impacts residents' food security and climate resilience. We worked with our food policy commission, which had appointees, residents, community garden advocates, food policy experts, and we
Mm-hmm.
really work with them to institute a new zoning code on urban agriculture. We legalize farmers markets, community gardens, urban farms, farm stands. Oh, beekeeping and hen keeping. I forgot to put that in there. That's kind of
Mm.
important. Cluck, cluck. And here's one of the farms that have emerged in Northeast Hartford on city land. So we're really proud that that farm has goats too. We didn't put goats in the ordinance, but these guys can do whatever they want. Bring on the goats.
Yeah.
That's Keeney Park Sustainability Project, which I mentioned in the book, and that's Herb Virgo in the background there too. I have a lot of folks make appearances in the book. So just to say, in Hartford, we really changed the zoning code in a few key ways, and I'm just talking at a very high level here because I know we'll get more questions in the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
Really focused on equity and sustainability. We also adopted a climate action plan that married right after the
Mm.
zoning code. We did that, so we tried to expand outward into energy, water usage, and a whole bunch of other topics that complemented what we were doing in the zoning code.
Okay.
Um, just a few words on Atlanta, because I know the partnership is
Yeah.
based in Atlanta.
Yeah.
An image from the zoning atlas, and in a nutshell, the zoning atlas is digitizing information about zoning codes across the
Mm-hmm.
country. What we do is we take zoning texts, and I love this cover image from Albany County, Wyoming, uh,
Mm.
zoning maps, and this image here with the little random blue donuts is from a town in Santa Fe County.
Mm.
Covered the parts of the country that are shown in purple and gray. So I just wanted to flag this as a resource for folks on the line, because as you can see,
Yeah.
we've done a bunch of Western states, a lot, including Alaska and Hawaii. We've completed Virginia, North Carolina, New England, and there's a lot of purple in Georgia. It's in and around the Atlanta metro area. The purple areas are areas that have zoning, and the gray areas are areas that don't have zoning. So the white are places we haven't done yet. So again, let's focus in on Atlanta. And here we were on Monday night. So
Oh,
we're
okay.
there. We did a little post about it. We were so excited to come present, not me, but the team. There's our directors,
Yeah.
Markley, Jeff, Patrick, our team members there. So we were very excited about that. But just to give you a sense of what we presented, I'll just show 3 slides. This
Okay.
shows you Atlanta. Purple is
Mm-hmm.
primarily residential. The darker purple is mixed with residential, and then there's non-residential land.
Mm-hmm.
The map has read all the zoning codes in the whole area and knows which areas are allow for different types of housing.
Uses.
So I just asked it, where can people build single family housing? That's on the left. See that little blue toggle is on.
Mm-hmm.
Everything basically stayed exactly as it was before. You can build single family housing
Everywhere.
everywhere in the
Yeah.
Atlanta metro.
Yeah.
94% of residential land allows single family housing.
Yeah.
To go to multifamily housing. Can you guess the percentage? This is within Atlanta itself. Apartments here are allowed on 28% of land in Atlanta, but metro wide, this is by right multifamily housing, it's 8%.
Wow.
So that's not as bad as some areas, but it's still very, very limiting. So when you think about
Yeah.
equity and as I said, when you enable denser housing and more housing, you have a climate impact too, because it enables people to share resources. It's not pushing
Yeah.
development outward. like
Yeah.
lot sizes do. So by the way, in Metro Atlanta, lot sizes are 1 acre or more for new housing in 61% of the land.
Yeah.
That
That's so
means that anybody who's buying a new home in Atlanta, it's real easy to build these
mm-hmm.
kinds of developments. They're driving. So then you
Yeah.
wonder, why is there so much air pollution? Why is it so costly to live here? Well, because everybody's got to pay the car insurance, gas.
Yeah.
Everybody's paying to maintain these roads out to these houses on
Yeah.
lots nearly the size of a football field. I'm going to just drop the mic with that one.
Yes.
And say, I know again, you just wanted me to spend a few minutes hitting on some highlights. I wouldn't do
Yeah.
this if I didn't also say the zoning atlas is out there for data in your region, but the big picture is there's a lot. And so connect with us here on LinkedIn and on the web
Yeah.
online. But the big picture is there are a lot of strategies in zoning that can help
Mm-hmm.
improve climate resiliency and equity. And we are very rarely using them. So I wrote the book to give people the narrative, the stories about, hey, what does this mean to real people? And then
Mm-hmm.
map
Yes.
is an ongoing companion piece that says, well, what does the data tell us? The data tells us that it's actually what the data tells us is it's worse than I thought it was. So
Mm.
bad. All right. I'll
Yeah.
stop sharing.
Well, that reminds me of one thing that I forgot to say about the book. For those of you that haven't gotten it yet, it is not a book that requires a lot of previous knowledge about zoning, which I really appreciate because I have a planning degree and I still find zoning to be very obscure and unnecessarily complicated. So, this makes things so easy to understand in the context of your everyday life. And to that point, I wanted to start out by asking you, we do have a question from the audience that I will get to, but I wanted to open up the conversation by asking you, and this has to do with my observation of Atlanta because I live here. This is a very like a question for like somebody that may not be as familiar with zoning as you or many other people here are. Why do neighborhoods look so different? Neighborhoods that are subject to the same, zoning ordinance that are very close to each other, yet they look vastly different.
So one of the things that we found in the zoning atlas is that that different neighborhoods have lobbied over time for different rules. So even if they're in the same city, or even if you have two suburbs that seem identical or seem like they should have similar characteristics, you see really different outcomes. One of the worst offenders in this regard is actually the city of Boston, Massachusetts, where it's a over 3,000 page code. So we thought Atlanta was complicated, but Boston is way worse in terms of the complexity of the code. And it has over 400 zoning districts in this 3,000 page code for a city that's 42 square miles. Now, Atlanta is a huge city square mileage. It has 240 districts. It actually has the largest number of districts per capita, so per person of any large city in the country. So it's worse than Boston in that regard. But from a
Atlanta is, you said?
Atlanta has more
Oh,
zoning districts per person than
yeah.
any of the other large cities in our metro.
Wow.
But Boston, there's a separate chapter of the zoning code for each neighborhood with completely different definitions for every neighborhood of the same terms. If it's apartments here, it might be 2 or 3 family. In the one neighborhood, it might be 10 family 10 unit buildings in another neighborhood. So we definitely have seen that across the country. And it
Yeah.
really is true that you get the neighborhood that you zone for. You see
Yeah.
slight differences have really big, slight differences in the text have really big differences in
Big
the neighborhood.
implications. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I didn't realize people were putting questions in the chat. I was looking at the Q&A. So we actually have a number of questions. So I'm going to go to the first one in the chat. It says, how did you navigate conversations with community members concerned about displacement in Hartford?
Yeah, so I think the fact that we had many meetings was very important. And I went to every neighborhood organization. There's 15 in the city. I gave a presentation. I said, hi, Does anybody here know what zoning is? Zoning is really important because X, Y, and Z. Here's what the zoning code says about this neighborhood right now. Do you like that? No. Do you like that? Yes. And just kind of started at the very basic
Yeah.
level and then heard feedback, went back to leaders of those organizations, in many cases went back to the organizations, met with merchants associations. I just was trying to be, and my fellow planning and zoning commissioners, we met with middle schoolers, tried to just do everything, we possibly could to get people talking about zoning. And I think
Okay.
that built a level of trust. However, in a city that had been so depopulated, the concern about there was not actually as much of a concern about displacement as you would think. In fact, the big concern was how do we get new investment on vacant and blighted properties? So I
Good.
think that's probably maybe different than what you might experience in
Problem.
fast growing southern cities.
Yeah.
Hartford
Yeah.
is a post-industrial New England city.
Right.
I would put it in the same category as Pittsburgh and Cleveland and
Yeah.
Buffalo, places
Yeah.
we just saw 100,000 people leave. Hartford
Yeah.
120,000 people. So maybe tens of thousands of people. Maybe I think the peak population is almost 200.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What do you recommend as the first step if a city knows they have to revise their zoning code? And how long does it actually take with meaningful public engagement?
Yeah, so it depends. I think for so large cities, what they love to do is they love to hire consultants and pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars to offload public meetings. Um,
Yeah.
that is something that adds time, huge amounts of costs, and it prevents the city, I think, from getting the best outcomes in some cases, maybe in many cases, because the people who are making the decisions, the zoning
Not.
commissioners, the elected
Yeah.
officials, should
Yeah.
be the ones that are buying into the
Right.
idea that you need a code. And I think the first step is having identifying elected officials or decision makers who are going to be the ones accountable to the whole process start to finish. And then if you hire a consultant to help you with a few things, that's fine. We hired a consultant who did a lot of work understanding building types in Hartford. So the architecture of the building so that we could create the form-based code, and added a lot of value to the process in other ways too. But
Mm.
we consider ourselves accountable to people. So the first step,
Right.
I think, is identifying the zoning champions. If you are in a large city, try to figure out where the city is going to spend that money. Because that money, as I
Mhm.
point out in the book, in places like Minneapolis, money was spent to hire babysitters for for people in the community so that
Wow.
they could attend public meetings. And
Yeah.
places you see people getting paid
Yeah.
$50 a meeting for their
Yeah.
ability to come in. And it would have made a huge difference had we done that in Hartford, even to get even
Yeah.
we got a lot of engagement, but to get even more engagement, we
Yeah.
didn't have a budget for that. But if you are throwing away money, hundreds of $1,000s on a consultant, consider what the community itself needs in order to participate in the process.
Yeah.
So I would
Okay.
say those two things would happen at the beginning, and then establishing key principles. So is it environment? Do you have a water management issue? Is it a housing issue? Everybody has a housing issue. Um,
Right.
and so like identify what are the key principles. Is the key principle more housing? Is the key principle more walkability? And if it
Right.
just militate towards that key principle as you
Hmm.
start out.
I also think that Minneapolis shows for the advocates in the audience, and I consider myself an advocate, that to the extent that the community is already organized, so that when the city starts its process, it's not just a one-way engagement, but they already have some level of buy-in and understanding. I think that makes all the difference. Because I don't know, in Minneapolis, it seemed like it was very much a bottom up process where folks already knew what they wanted to advocate for. Okay, so let's see.
And there are questions in the Q&A now too. You're like gonna be it's like a flood. It's great.
Let's see. Okay, how does community become a critical partner in the development process? Well, since you kind of spoke to that, let's see if we can touch on something we haven't talked on yet. Let's see. Okay. Could you give an example of a small difference in zoning code? Oh, it just disappeared. Okay, that makes a big difference in neighborhood outcome.
Sure. I would use, I'll just say two. One is minimum lot sizes and
Mm,
parking mandates. So a minimum lot size says for any development, if it's a single family or two family or a retail space or
hmm
a or a, a hair salon, you have to have this number of parking spaces. Sorry, you have to have this number of acres. So, for example, we have communities that say, well, you only need a tenth of an acre to have a single family house. The outcome of that is that houses are built closer together. The
Yeah.
neighborhood is more walkable because you can, you're not necessarily, if you're on a tenth of an acre, you might not have a garage, a parking garage. You might in
hmm
your drive, you might not have a driveway. So more likely, you'll have a situation where you have sidewalks. Um, for parking mandates, and these are somewhat related, the communities that say you have to have two parking spaces for every unit of housing, especially when there's multifamily housing, or the communities that say you have to have three parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet of retail space. So if you think about it, a parking space is about 200 square feet. If you need three of those, that's 600 square feet. Then you need the driveway, the drive aisle. That's 1,000 square feet. What you're telling somebody who wants to open a small business is if you got a parking mandate, you want to open a retail shop, you're going to have to say for every 1,000 square feet, you're going to have 1,000 square foot parking lot. That is a very common, by the way, rule,
Yeah.
the three spaces per 1,000 square feet. So in terms of a small business, you're not going to get small businesses to go to a
Right.
community where they're having parking mandates, or they will go and then they'll do exactly what happened in Denise's neighborhood. We had parking mandates all over Hartford. And instead of trying to figure out there was no such thing as a shared parking solution. They tore down buildings up and down Albany Avenue and then paved them, made smaller retail spaces like a convenience stores, paved the whole front. And so they satisfied the parking mandate, but they did that by tearing down lots of buildings in her neighborhood, which totally changed the urban environment.
Wow.
If you go
Yeah.
to other communities that never had a parking mandate or that maybe experienced a lack of development, that's actually a good thing because those buildings are still there generating value. And so I'm a
hmm
fan of eliminating parking mandates. But just
mm
night and day, if you have a parking
hmm
mandate, you will not see small businesses develop as easily. If they do come, they're going to develop in car-centric ways. They're going to
Yeah.
parking on their lot. Versus if you don't have one, you'll see more small businesses, you'll see more walkability. Same with the
hmm
minimum lot sizes. You get a minimum lot size of even a half acre, and all the people who live in that neighborhood are driving.
hmm What city do you think has actually been the most successful in shifting culture? Because I don't know. In Atlanta, people are not, they're not trying to give up their cars. They're not trying to give up their big yards. So how, like,
I
have
think
you?
that the way to talk about it is that you're providing options. So in Atlanta, unless you really live, work, and maybe downtown in a few neighborhoods, which do have mixed uses from my recollection, you're mostly driving from here to there. You don't have a choice. And
Mhm.
the way that cities have been most successful is talking about the choice. Do you want a choice? And it sort of has a spillover effect, I think, when you talk about choice, because we've seen huge changes in zoning reform in Texas, red state, my home state. The state legislature has stepped in and said, we're going to override local zoning. We're going to require more housing. We're going to eliminate parking mandates. We're going to say anywhere
Wow.
there's commercial development, you can have residential development. That's what the Texas legislature just did for large cities because they said,
Wow.
you know what? For them, it's not about climate resilience, I could tell you,
Right.
or equity. It's about
Yeah.
property rights. So what their argument is, property owners should be able to do
Don't
a
tell me
bunch
what
of
to
different
do with
things
my
with
land.
their
Yeah.
property. It so happens that in many cases, there's a good Venn diagram where a mix of uses,
Hmm.
commercial and residential, or no parking, or less expensive development. That
Hmm.
actually is a good thing.
Hmm. Okay. Okay, so one last question from the chat and then I'm gonna move to the Q&A box. So, um, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, a rapid growth city with a new zoning code. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, oh, you talked about limiting sizes. Let's see, we're losing historic African American neighborhoods because developers only want to build large buildings. Okay, and the code does nothing to restrict this. Okay. Um, okay. Well, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, I'll just say that cities have put caps on height. So this is going back to the idea, and there's questions about form-based codes too. So a
Hmm.
form-based code can do things like say, all right, in this neighborhood, so for example, in Denise's neighborhood, we said on Albany Avenue, it's not these one-story setback
Right.
buildings. They have to be minimum 2 stories, between 2 and 4 stories. They have to be built up to the street. So they
Hmm.
can't be parking before the building. We're going
Hmm.
to create a totally different walking environment, just like it
Hmm.
was before, just like it was historically. And to honor the wishes of the residents who wanted a more walkable area. So the form-based code can help to modulate the pace of development through the size of the building. Now, I think I didn't read but you said that the person also mentioned that they want to build large buildings.
Hmm.
So I just was in Austin, Texas. If anybody's been there recently, it's 50-story new building after, and hotels and apartment buildings, basically a lot of those, one after the other. And there has not been a lot of attention paid to the street level and the quality of the street level of those buildings. So what's ended up happening is you have these really big buildings that shade the street, that basically prevent you from putting trees on the street because it's so shaded, but and
Yeah.
then really relate to the urban environment, especially or even in downtown where you have people walking all over the place, sort of these blank walls, no engagement,
Yeah.
dark glass, things like that. Those are the kinds of things requiring doorways every so often, having clear glass at between 2 and 8 feet of the street. That's what we say for Hartford's downtown and our main avenues in Hartford. Those are things that you can do to mitigate the impact of large buildings on the street. But you also have to make it way easier to build the apartment buildings between 2 and 10 units. Those developers have a really hard time making the finances work already. So we really tried to, in Hartford, try to figure out, okay, it's fine. We can build some tall buildings downtown. That's fine. But it's all of our neighborhoods where it's the 2, 3, 4, 5 story development max, where we really knew we needed to generate some new development. That's still in progress for sure in Hartford. But there have been buildings that have been rehabbed in within the neighborhoods using the new code, often without putting any parking. So
Hmm.
so I do think it's well worth thinking about how to make that missing middle housing a lot easier.
Hmm. Hmm. And you're just so that I'm clear, the reforms that you recommend when you say it should make the financing easier, right? Not
Yeah,
more.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if a bank knows that this project will have a by right approval process, that's a
Hmm.
big difference than saying, I'm trying to build 4 units and I'm going to go through a year's worth of public hearings. That
Right.
kills those
Right.
buildings. Uh,
Right.
and in Charlotte, I can't speak to the loss of African American neighbors. I see the question now,
Hmm.
specifically in Charlotte.
Hmm.
Definitely something that we see not just because of new development, but because of lack of historic preservation protections for those neighborhoods. I
Hmm.
served for 2 years in the Biden administration as chair of the Federal Historic Preservation Agency. I
Hmm.
realize in that role that one of the big issues is that we have protected through historic designation, all kinds of things that relate to what you might consider the dominant history,
Yeah.
history of men,
Yeah. Yeah.
included among that, but certainly have overlooked and not designated and not protected buildings associated with African American history.
Mhm.
I'm Mexican American. I have been very involved in Latinos for heritage conservation, just because
Mhm.
that is an underutilized strategy for low income
Mhm.
communities and historically minority communities to actually protect develop their areas from development. So I'll
Mhm.
just flag
Mhm.
that as another issue that
Yeah.
can be a strategy for community preservation as well.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to the Q&A, and the question in here is, I live in Durham, North Carolina city. A lot of North Carolina folks here. The city is currently going through a rewrite of the UDO. One of the many things that is of concern is doing away with the zoning process. Wow. Under the guise that this process is expensive and preventative of affordable housing, and densities being heralded and parking lots are discouraged. Well, yeah, that's those are all the things that you're advocating for. But I guess there are concerns, as there should be. I feel like a lot of your book actually speaks to the process, like the zoning process and getting people on the same page and really like lifting up the real benefits. Like when you talked about imagine not having to pay for car insurance and a car, all the things that come with driving a car every day. And I don't think that people think about, they definitely don't think about zoning decisions, but even their life choices in that way of like what would be the cost savings if I didn't have to
People
have.
take, especially, I'm from Houston, not too dissimilar from Atlanta in so many ways. And I think people just assume they're gonna have a car.
Yeah.
They really don't think necessarily, what if I weren't paying a third of my paycheck every month on this car, what can I do with that third of my
Yeah.
paycheck? And how would I, move to how, like it's almost impossible, especially well for Houston for sure. At least in my experience, it's impossible to think of if you can afford a car, not
Hmm.
having a car. It's like what?
Right.
How would you get anywhere in this?
Right.
And that's I think why really thinking about creating neighborhoods that have conveniences that you can get to in a where you don't have to drive to them. And that's an issue too for aging. And I'm sure some of the folks on this call work with elderly housing or
Hmm.
deal with aging communities too. I'm sure there's a few. Um,
Yeah.
for people who can't use a car anymore or shouldn't use a car anymore, there's no options for them. So I think I just go back to the options
Yeah.
thing. And also the speaking of the process, it's really the zoning reforms require in public input. So in Durham and wherever they're happening, they require public hearings, they require some public process. When the code is rewritten, the question is, where is the process going? Going
Hmm.
at the time where you've written the code, you've established all the criteria, the way the buildings are going to look, where they're going to be, and you can say, job well done. If we need to change it, we will. But in the absence of needing to change it again, then a developer can come in, and if they follow all the rules in the zoning code, there is no public hearing. That's how it is in Hartford.
Hmm.
We've retained a few uses that still have public hearings, like new bars. Okay, like we need public hearing for those.
Yeah.
But the run of the mill housing, even
Yeah.
craftsman industrial uses, we don't have public hearings because we've done the big public process in advance. And I see a
Okay.
comment in the chat about streamlining the process will make smaller development easier. I
Yeah.
That's really been our approach, and what I see across the country as being the emerging best practice, because every public hearing you have, especially for housing, is a deal killer.
Hmm. Okay. Um, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to best tackle all of these questions in the Q&A. So, any quick insights on how to solve tensions between developers' priorities and community priorities? I mean, I think that's a process thing.
I think that's where you have to, I mean, going back to
Yeah.
maybe the very first question that was asked, I think you have to have a trusted leader that's going to navigate the process to balance those two. So
Mhm.
for me, in in leading Hartford, and different people will take different approaches, my priority was, what do people who have lived here for a long time want to see in the neighborhood? And that's why people like Denise were so
Mhm.
important. She had lived in the neighborhood for decades,
Mhm.
understanding what she was most interested in, what her observations were, how zoning could help. I really viewed myself as a translator for that. So again, I think the trusted leader, and maybe you're I don't know who asked the question. Maybe you're the trusted leader. Maybe,
Right.
you volunteer to be on the zoning commission and see this through, or maybe you're a planning professional. Maybe you say, hey, I'd love to get a contract with the city to help lead this process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really takes the trusted leader to do a good balance.
Okay, this person is speaking to the obstacle of zoning being restrictive, but even when it's isn't restrictive, um, it's not used to instill in people why beauty is fundamental to creating lovable places. What are effective zoning rules that successfully honor the living traditions of the places that we love?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And that last part of my book, called Designing for Delight, is really all about this. So I am an architect, I am a preservationist, and I think what has happened is we've basically decided, especially if you're poor, you don't deserve beauty. You don't deserve trees. You don't deserve fine materials,
Yeah.
well-connected places, in terms of connections to the street.
Mm-hmm.
Porches, get it. So I actually, there's a new urbanist also who identified themselves in the chat. I'm very much aligned with the idea that we can, you don't want to say every building has to be gold plated or anything like that.
Right.
To a degree, designers, architects, property owners are making choices when they build something new, and you want to guide their choices in a way that basically requires them to, in exchange for, in our case, a streamlined reviews, that requires them to contribute to the public realm and to make it more beautiful. So
Mm-hmm.
I talk about the lost signs in Las Vegas, which some people think are beautiful. Galveston's historic district regulations. So again, from Texas, I use a few Texas examples. The beach community of Delray, Florida, and their form-based code, and things like colors that they
Mm-hmm.
require in the code, turquoises, and
Yeah.
you wouldn't see that in
Yeah.
Hartford, but they're
Yeah.
turquoises and
Yeah.
coral, pink, and
Yeah.
whatever. So there's a way to instill some of that in the zoning code, and also to shape a place based on aesthetic principles. And this is
Mhm.
not for everybody. This is what I definitely get pushback for a lot, but I'm totally aligned with the commenter who said, people deserve beautiful places, and
Yeah.
zoning codes and building codes that just encourage people to do the cheapest thing and not think of trees. I think are really important landscaping.
Yes.
If you don't write that into the code, people won't do it. And Hartford tree canopy coverage totally decimated. We
Yeah.
wrote it into the code because our tree commission views it as an equity issue to have trees. Yes, it costs money to plant them at the beginning, but what we get in exchange is a cooler city, less
Yeah.
heat island effect, a more beautiful city. Trees reduce crime. They raise property values. So over time, we want to build the tree canopy, and that's what the zoning code also does.
Yeah. Same in Atlanta. Um, okay. What lessons from urban areas are applicable to small towns with fewer resources?
I think the small towns actually have more flexibility and opportunity to change. I do have a few
Mhm.
examples in my book. One is Sandpoint, Idaho, a town of, I think, 7,000 people, that has gotten a lot of attention for eliminating parking after a bank parking lot tore down several buildings, including, I think, a beloved Mexican restaurant. So once you get to the Mexican restaurant, they're like, we're out, no more parking mandates, which I think is great. Have a special
Mhm.
affinity, as CD said, for Mexican restaurants. But in all seriousness, I mean, the small towns have better shot at getting something through the process without expensive consultants. And you can learn from other small towns. So again, I have some stories in the book about that. Um, and for a preservationist, if it's a small town with a historic main street as opposed to a newer type suburb, but the historic main streets are the best opportunity for smaller towns. Those have often been, they've often had zoning changes, especially in the 50s and 60s, that banned housing as they
Mm.
were built with shopkeepers living above. But then the zoning codes banned housing, added parking mandates, was very restrictive on what types of uses could be built there. And so basically prevented the buildings from being reused for other uses. So maybe they banned gyms,
Mm-hmm.
like sort of, fitness centers, but that would be perfectly good new use for a building that has been abandoned for some decades. And the only thing you could put there right now is retail because that's what the zoning code says. I think
Mm.
digging into the zoning code is very important. And I would also caution against small towns having codes as long and complicated as large cities. We see that across the country. We've read over 1 million pages of zoning codes with the National Zoning Atlas, and
Mm-hmm.
definitely seen small towns trying to keep up with 200, 300-page zoning codes. You're like, what are you doing? Like just so
Crazy.
reduce regulations is
Yeah. Okay, we'll take just two more questions. One, how does the zoning, since you just talked about the zoning atlas, how does it address the details of form-based codes?
Yes, so we do log height caps,
Okay.
lot coverage requirements, setbacks, and things like
Oh,
that, which are common in form-based codes. Form-based codes have build two lines instead of setbacks. So when there's something like that that's really unique to form-based codes, we'll make an internal note about it. On the atlas itself, though, we show whether there are height caps and things like that. So
okay.
you see some of that on the back end. We have a lot more information than we have in the front end of the zoning atlas.
Okay.
And by the way, at some point in the new year, we will be able to, I know there's a lot of developers on this call. Let me know by email, and I'll put an email in the chat if you have any interest in um, either building out new areas that we haven't done, that's a philanthropic thing, or licensing data. We should be able to do that in the new year. We've gotten a lot of requests for that. And so we're trying to set ourselves up for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, what is a good question to end on? Um,
There's a building code question in the
you want to
chat.
end on that one?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good one to end on because
Okay.
it's the next frontier. So we've talked
Mm,
so much about zoning, and zoning
yeah.
is obviously very, very important for climate, for housing, for equity, and just really how our lives are structured. But the question about building codes, what can building codes do to enable new housing, or what are people thinking about in terms of building codes? I'll just say that that's maybe the next frontier. And when we get building codes and zoning codes right, and historic preservation right, and we all, these regimes can start working together, I think we'll be much better off. So we are building, as Cede said, the National Preservation Atlas to log preservation rules. We haven't gotten a building codes project articulated or underway yet, but we've definitely been asked for that too. So thank you
Oh,
for the question.
I'm on Atlanta's Preservation City Commission, so I'm excited about that. Okay. I'm sorry we did not get to all of the questions, but if we can put up Xavier, Sarah's contact information one last time so that folks know how to get in touch with her. And then I'll just say on behalf of Just Communities, thank you all so much for joining. This is the last webinar for this year, so please come back next year. All of our stuff is up at justcommunities.info. And then here is Sarah's information. Sarah, thank you so much for your time and all your expertise. And we will definitely stay connected.
Thanks again. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.